I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who would meticulously plan her husband's financial ruin. Yet here I am, sitting at my kitchen table with a winning lottery ticket worth $4.7 million carefully hidden in the lining of my purse, calculating exactly how I'll disappear from Mark's life while leaving him drowning in the debt he created. The irony isn't lost on me. 6 months ago, I was the one drowning, in tears, in betrayal, in the realization that the man I'd trusted with my heart and our future had gambled away everything we'd built together. 12 years of marriage, a lifetime of dreams, and $387,452 in savings. Gone. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it began, to the day I discovered that my husband wasn't just a liar, but a man who would sacrifice our future for the fleeting high of a bet. It was an ordinary Tuesday in April, the kind of spring day where the air feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for summer. I'd taken a half-day off work to prepare for our anniversary dinner that weekend. 15 years together, 12 of them married. I wanted to surprise Mark with a second honeymoon, 2 weeks in Bali, where we'd always talked about going but never found the time. I remember smiling as I logged into our joint savings account, anticipating the moment when I'd tell him I'd finally booked it. We'd been saving for years, diligently building our dream fund for exactly this kind of splurge, alongside our retirement accounts and the down payment fund for the lake house we planned to buy when we turned 50. The screen loaded. I blinked, certain there was some mistake. Where there should have been $387,452, the balance showed $8,213.19. My first thought was identity theft. Heart racing, I called the bank. Mrs. Carter, there haven't been any unauthorized transactions, the customer service representative said after verifying my identity. The withdrawals were all made by the primary account holder over the past 18 months. Mr. Mark Carter. I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience. That's not possible. There must be some mistake. I'm afraid not, ma'am. I can see a series of transfers to external accounts. Would you like me to email you the transaction history? I must have said yes, because minutes later, I was staring at an 18-month history of my husband systematically draining our savings. Transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. Withdrawals of increasing size. The pattern was clear. Small amounts at first, a few thousand here and there, then larger sums, more frequently over the past 6 months. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone to call Mark. It went straight to voicemail. I tried his office line. Mr. Carter is in meetings all day, his assistant said brightly. Can I take a message? Tell him to come home immediately, I said, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. Tell him it's an emergency. I sat at the kitchen table for 3 hours, the transaction history spread out before me like a map of betrayal. By the time I heard Mark's key in the door, I'd cried until I had no tears left, moving from disbelief to a hollow, aching despair. Lisa? What's wrong? Jen said it was an emergency. He rushed in, still in his navy blue suit, concern etched on his face. The face I'd woken up to for 12 years, the face I thought I knew better than my own. I didn't speak. I just pointed to the papers on the table. He froze when he saw them, and in that moment, before he said a single word, I knew. The blood drained from his face. He set his briefcase down with deliberate slowness. I can explain, he said quietly. Nearly $400,000, Mark. My voice was eerily calm. Explain that. He sat down heavily across from me, running his hands through his dark hair. The same gesture I'd always found endearing, now infuriating in its familiarity. I was going to put it back, he said, and the pathetic inadequacy of those words hung in the air between us. I had a system. I was so close to a big win that would have fixed everything. Gambling, I said flatly. Not a question. His silence was confirmation enough. How long? I asked. The serious losses. About 2 years. He couldn't meet my eyes. But I've been playing poker since college. You knew that. I knew you played with friends for small stakes. Not that you were emptying our life savings into... What? Casinos? Online poker? Both. And sports betting. He spoke so softly I had to lean forward to hear him. It started small, but then I had some losses to recover, and there was this system I developed. Stop. I held up my hand. Just stop. Do you hear yourself? You sound like every gambling addict cliché. I'm not an addict, he said, a flash of anger crossing his face. I hit a rough patch, but I'm going to fix this. I laughed then, a hollow sound that frightened even me. Fix this? Mark, we have $8,000 left. 8,000. Out of nearly 400,000. I know how much is left, he snapped, then immediately softened his tone. Lisa, honey, please try to understand. I've been under so much pressure at work, and when I'm playing, it's the only time I feel free. In control. In control? I stood up so quickly my chair toppled backward. You've been controlling our financial ruin. What about the lake house? What about our retirement? What about next month's mortgage payment? I'll figure it out. I always do. Clearly you don't! You've been figuring it out by stealing from our future. My voice rose to a shout. Did you think about me at all? About what this would do to us? Of course I did. That's why I kept trying to win it back. His face crumpled. Lisa, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know I messed up, but we can get through this. I'll get help. I'll stop. We can rebuild. I stood there looking at this stranger wearing my husband's face and felt something inside me break irreparably. Get out, I whispered. What? I said get out. I can't look at you right now. This is my house too, he said, a stubborn set to his jaw that I'd once found charming. Now it just looked petulant. A house with a mortgage that you've endangered. I shot back. Just go to a hotel for the night. I need to think. He started to argue, then seemed to think better of it. He nodded once, grabbed his briefcase, and left without another word. I sank to the floor as soon as the door closed, my legs no longer able to support me. The silence of the house pressed in from all sides as the full weight of what had happened settled over me. Our savings, our future, our trust, all gambled away by the man who had promised to protect them. I don't know how long I sat there on the kitchen floor, but by the time I dragged myself to bed, the sky outside was dark, and I felt hollowed out, as if someone had scooped out everything that made me who I was and left just a shell behind. Sleep didn't come. Instead, I lay awake, replaying every moment of our marriage through this new lens of betrayal. Had there been signs I'd missed? Red flags I'd ignored? The mysterious weekend trips he'd taken for work conferences, the times he'd been short on cash despite his six-figure salary, the mood swings, the late nights at the office that never seemed to result in any actual work product. I'd trusted him completely. That's what hurt the most. Not just the money, though God knows that was devastating enough, but the systematic deception, the hundreds, maybe thousands of lies he must have told to hide this from me. Every time he'd looked me in the eye and talked about our future plans, he'd known they were built on a foundation that he was actively destroying. Morning found me red-eyed but resolute. I called in sick to work, something I rarely did, then spent the day making calls to our other accounts, our investment advisor, our credit card companies. The picture that emerged was even worse than I'd feared. Mark had not only emptied our joint savings, but had also taken out a second mortgage on our house without my knowledge, forging my signature, I would later discover, maxed out 3 credit cards, and borrowed against his 401k. All told, he'd lost close to $600,000 and put us nearly $200,000 in debt beyond that. When he came home that evening, suitcase in hand and desperation in his eyes, I was waiting. I've made some calls, I said without preamble. I know about the second mortgage. The credit cards. Your 401k? He set his suitcase down slowly. I was going to tell you everything. When? After we were completely bankrupt? I took a deep breath. I've made an appointment with a financial advisor tomorrow, and I've found a therapist who specializes in gambling addiction. You're going to both. Hope flickered across his face. So, you're not leaving? The question hung between us, heavy with implication. Was I leaving? The thought had certainly crossed my mind in the dark hours of the night, but 12 years of marriage isn't easily discarded, even in the face of such profound betrayal. I don't know yet, I answered honestly. That depends on you. I'll do anything, he said quickly. Whatever it takes. I'll get help. I'll stop gambling completely. I promise, Lisa. I nodded, too emotionally exhausted to argue about promises from a man whose promises had proven worthless. We'll see. The weeks that followed were a blur of appointments, financial, legal, and therapeutic. Mark attended Gamblers Anonymous meetings 3 times a week. He installed blocking software on all his devices to prevent access to gambling sites. He surrendered control of all our remaining finances to me. He cried, he apologized, he swore he would make it right. And I tried. God knows I tried to believe him, to forgive him, to focus on rebuilding rather than dwelling on what we'd lost. But something had fundamentally changed in me. I found myself watching him constantly, looking for signs of deceit. I checked his phone when he was in the shower. I followed up on his whereabouts. I verified every statement he made about his day. The trust that had been the foundation of our relationship was gone, replaced by a hypervigilance that exhausted us both. "You have to give me a chance to prove myself," he said one night after I questioned where he'd been when he was 15 minutes late coming home from work. "This constant suspicion isn't helping either of us." "And whose fault is that?" I snapped. "You destroyed my trust, Mark. You can't expect me to just hand it back to you because you're suddenly doing what you should have been doing all along." He didn't have an answer for that. 2 months after D-Day, as I'd come to think of it, I discovered the first relapse. A cash withdrawal of $500 from his personal checking account, followed by an evening when he claimed to be working late. A quick check of his location history, yes, I'd installed tracking on his phone, what had I become, showed him at a local casino for 3 hours. When confronted, he broke down completely. "I'm sick, Lisa," he sobbed. "I need help. Real help. More than just the meetings." He voluntarily checked himself into a 30-day inpatient treatment program the next day. I drove him there myself, watching in the rearview mirror as our house disappeared behind us, wondering if anything would ever feel like home again. While he was gone, I threw myself into trying to salvage our financial situation. I took on consulting work on top of my full-time job as a marketing director. I listed our house for sale. We couldn't afford it anymore, not with the second mortgage. I sold my car and bought a used Honda with the proceeds. I clipped coupons, canceled subscriptions, and lived as frugally as possible. But the math was implacable. Even if we downsized everything, even if I worked myself to exhaustion, even if Mark found a higher-paying job after treatment, we were looking at 15 to 20 years to pay off the debt and rebuild even a modest retirement fund. The lake house dream was dead. Our planned trip to see the Northern Lights for our 50th birthdays? Gone. The financial security we'd worked so hard to create? Shattered. One evening, about 2 weeks into Mark's treatment program, I was sorting through a stack of mail when I came across a letter from his mother. Carolyn had always been kind to me, if a bit distant, and I wondered what she had to say now that her son was in rehab for gambling addiction. The letter wasn't addressed to both of us, just to Mark, but in my new state of perpetual suspicion, I opened it anyway. Inside was a birthday card with a $50 bill and a short note. "Mark, happy 43rd birthday. I know things are difficult right now, but remember that you come from strong stock. Your father faced the same demons and overcame them. You will too. Love, Mom." I read the note 3 times. The words, "Your father faced the same demons," burning themselves into my brain. In 12 years of marriage, Mark had never once mentioned that his father had a gambling problem. He'd told me his dad had died of a heart attack when Mark was in college, but had never suggested that gambling had been part of his father's life. Something about this revelation broke something loose inside me. A new wave of anger washed over me, not just at the deception, but at the deliberate withholding of such crucial information. Mark had known he might have a predisposition to gambling addiction. He'd watched his own father struggle with it, and he'd never thought this was something I should know about the man I was marrying. I called Carolyn that night. "I'm sorry for opening Mark's mail," I said after exchanging pleasantries, "but I saw your note about his father having the same issues." There was a long silence before she sighed heavily. "I wondered if he'd ever told you." "He didn't." My voice was tight. "I'd appreciate it if you could tell me the truth now. Richard, Mark's father, was a wonderful man," she began, her voice taking on the distant quality of someone revisiting painful memories. "Brilliant, charming, hardworking. But he couldn't walk past a racetrack without placing a bet. Couldn't watch a game without having money on it. Couldn't play a hand of cards without raising the stakes." It sounded so painfully familiar that I had to sit down. "He lost everything more than once," she continued. "We nearly lost our house when Mark was in high school. Richard would get help, stay clean for a while, then relapse. It was exhausting." "Did he ever really beat it?" I asked, dreading the answer. Another long pause. "No," she finally admitted. "The heart attack that killed him happened at a casino in Atlantic City. He'd told me he was on a business trip." I closed my eyes, imagining Mark as a college student, receiving the news that his father had died while pursuing the very addiction that had caused his family so much pain. "Why didn't Mark tell me any of this?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Shame, I suppose. And perhaps fear that you might not marry him if you knew gambling addiction ran in the family." Her voice softened. Lisa, I want you to know that I understand whatever decision you make about your marriage. I stood by Richard for 30 years, through multiple relapses and recoveries. It was hard, but I loved him. However, if I'd known then what that choice would really mean, I'm not sure I would make the same decision again. After we hung up, I sat in the dark living room for hours, turning this new information over and over in my mind. Mark had hidden not just his own gambling, but the family history that made his addiction almost predictable. He'd denied me the chance to make an informed decision about marrying into a family with this particular demon lurking in its genetic code. And now I faced the same choice his mother had: stay and fight an endless battle against an addiction that had already devastated our finances and trust, or leave and rebuild my life alone. The night before Mark was due to come home from treatment, I still hadn't made my decision. I was standing in line at the grocery store, absently flipping through a magazine, when the headline caught my eye: "Record $570 million Powerball jackpot tonight." I rarely bought lottery tickets. The occasional office pool for massive jackpots was the extent of my gambling. But something about this moment, this headline, struck me as darkly funny. While my husband was in treatment for gambling away our savings, here I was, contemplating spending $2 on a lottery ticket. On impulse, I added a quick pick to my purchase. As the cashier handed me the ticket, I tucked it into my wallet with a wry smile, thinking, wouldn't it be ironic if I won? That night, I didn't even watch the drawing. I was too busy preparing for Mark's return, cleaning the small apartment I'd rented after selling our house, trying to make it feel welcoming despite its cramped quarters and the lingering anger I couldn't seem to shake. It wasn't until the following morning, while waiting for my coffee to brew, that I remembered the ticket. On a whim, I pulled it out and checked the numbers against the results on my phone. The mug slipped from my fingers and shattered on the kitchen floor. 5 numbers plus the Powerball. Not the jackpot, but a second-tier prize worth $4.7 million before taxes. I stared at the numbers, checking and rechecking them as coffee pooled around my bare feet. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen in real life, certainly not to women whose husbands had just gambled away their life savings. But it was real. I had matched the numbers 7, 15, 23, 42, 59, and Powerball 17. In my hands was a ticket worth more money than Mark had lost. My first coherent thought was, he can never know about this. The realization came with such clarity, such certainty, that it took my breath away. If Mark knew I'd won millions, all his progress, all his therapy would be at risk. Not to mention, I knew with bone-deep certainty that he would see it as the universe balancing the scales, his gambling losses magically erased by my win, absolving him of the real consequences of his actions. And something darker stirred inside me then. A thought so vindictive, so unlike the woman I'd always believed myself to be, that I tried to push it away. But it persisted, taking root and growing stronger with each passing minute. What if I took the money and left? I could start over. I could rebuild the future that Mark had destroyed. I could be free of the suspicion and resentment that had become as much a part of me as my heartbeat. But could I live with myself if I did that? I was still standing there, surrounded by broken ceramic and cooling coffee, when my phone rang. It was the treatment center, confirming that I would be picking Mark up at noon. Yes, I heard myself say, I'll be there. I cleaned up the mess mechanically, my mind racing. I needed time to think, to plan. I couldn't make this decision in the few hours before I had to collect my husband from rehab. So I did the only thing I could think of. I hid the ticket in a small slit I cut in the lining of my purse, drove to the treatment center with a smile plastered on my face, and brought my husband home, to our new diminished life. It's smaller than I expected, Mark said as we entered the apartment, his voice carefully neutral. It's what we can afford now, I replied, watching his face for any sign of resentment or blame. But he just nodded, setting his suitcase down in the corner of the living room. It's nice. You've made it feel like home already. I tried. I hesitated, then asked the question that had been burning in me since his mother's revelation. Mark, why didn't you ever tell me about your father's gambling problem? He froze, then slowly turned to face me. How did you find out about that? Your mother mentioned it in a birthday card. I opened it while you were away. I met his gaze steadily. Were you ever planning to tell me? He sank onto the second-hand couch I'd bought after selling our custom sectional. Honestly? Probably not. He ran a hand through his hair, now sporting flecks of gray at the temples that hadn't been there before his treatment. I was ashamed. I watched what gambling did to my family growing up, and I swore I'd never be like him. I thought if I didn't talk about it, didn't acknowledge it, I could make sure it never became part of my life. That worked out well, I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. I deserve that, he admitted. Lisa, in treatment, we talked a lot about honesty, about how secrets feed addiction. I should have told you about my dad from the beginning. It was wrong to hide it from you, and I'm sorry. His apology sounded sincere. They always did. But I'd learned the hard way that Mark's sincerity had an expiration date. Is there anything else I should know? I asked. Any other secrets you've been keeping? He hesitated just long enough to make my stomach clench. There's something else, he said quietly. Something I didn't tell you before I went into treatment. I braced myself, wondering what fresh hell was coming. More debt? Another mortgage I didn't know about? A secret child from a previous relationship? I lost my job 2 weeks before I went into treatment, he said, staring at his hands. They found out I'd been using company time to gamble online. They were going to press charges but agreed not to if I resigned immediately and sought treatment. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. So all this time when I thought you had a job to go back to? I'm sorry, he whispered. I was afraid if I told you everything at once, you'd leave for sure. I laughed then, a harsh sound that made him flinch. You know what's funny, Mark? I've been killing myself working 2 jobs to keep us afloat, believing that soon you'd be contributing again. I've been making spreadsheets and budgets based on your salary resuming. And all this time you knew it was a lie. I'm going to find work, he said quickly. I've already started applying. My sponsor is helping me practice how to explain the gap in my employment. Your gap in employment? I repeated incredulously. Is that what we're calling gambling addiction and nearly facing criminal charges now? Lisa, please. He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. I know I've made terrible mistakes. I know I've hurt you in ways I can never fully make right. But I'm trying. I'm really trying to be the man you deserve. I looked at him then, really looked at him. The man I had loved for 15 years. The man I had planned to grow old with. The man who had systematically destroyed everything we'd built together while lying to my face. And I realized something that sent an icy calm washing over me. I didn't love him anymore. Maybe I could forgive him someday, but the love, the trust, the respect, the admiration was gone. In its place was only weariness and the dawning recognition that I was facing a lifetime of this cycle. Recovery, relapse, just like his father. I need some air, I said, grabbing my purse, the one with the winning lottery ticket hidden in its lining. Don't wait up. I drove aimlessly for hours, the weight of the hidden ticket like a burning coal against my side. By the time I returned to the apartment, Mark was asleep on the couch, an empty pizza box on the coffee table. He hadn't even cleaned up after himself. I stood watching him sleep, this stranger who had once been the center of my world, and made my decision. The next morning, I acted as normal as possible, making coffee and toast, asking about his plans for the day. I have a GA meeting at 10? He said, looking relieved at my seemingly improved mood. Then I thought I'd update my resume and start applying for jobs. What about you? I need to go into the office for a while, I said casually. Then I have some errands to run. One of those errands was a visit to a lawyer I'd found who specialized in both lottery winnings and divorce proceedings. I needed to know my options. The consultation was eye-opening. In most states, lottery winnings during a marriage are considered marital property, even if only one spouse purchased the ticket. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Jennifer, explained. However, there are some circumstances that might alter that situation, such as, I leaned forward, heart racing. Well, if you're separated at the time of the win, or if you purchase the ticket with separate property funds, like an inheritance that was never commingled with marital assets, you might have a case for keeping the winnings separate. She looked at me carefully. May I ask where things stand with your marriage currently? I hesitated, then decided on complete honesty. My husband just completed treatment for gambling addiction after losing our entire savings, about $600,000, and putting us in debt for another $200,000. He also lost his job due to gambling at work and hid that from me until yesterday. Jennifer's expression softened with sympathy. I see. And the lottery ticket? I bought it the day before he came home from treatment. We were living separately at that point. I'd sold our house and moved into an apartment. The ticket cost $2 from my personal checking account. She tapped her pen against her legal pad. That's helpful. The separation might be particularly relevant here. Have you claimed the prize yet? No. I've been trying to figure out what to do. Don't cash it until we have a strategy, she advised. Lottery winners generally have a period of time, often 180 days or more, to claim prizes. We'll need to be very careful about how and when you claim it. By the time I left Jennifer's office, I had the outlines of a plan. It wasn't a sure thing. Nothing in law ever is, but it gave me hope that I might be able to secure at least part of the winnings for myself. More importantly, I had clarity about what I wanted. I wanted out of the marriage, out of the cycle of addiction and recovery, out of the financial hole Mark had dug for us. I wanted a fresh start, unburdened by his mistakes. Was it selfish? Probably. Was it what the old Lisa would have done? Definitely not. But I wasn't that woman anymore. That woman had died the day she discovered her husband had gambled away their future while systematically lying about it for years. The new Lisa, harder, warier, more pragmatic, had a lottery ticket worth millions and a growing determination to use it to escape the prison her marriage had become. Over the next few weeks, I worked closely with Jennifer to set our plan in motion. The key was establishing clear separation before claiming the ticket, strengthening my case that the winnings were separate property. We filed for legal separation immediately, with Mark's reluctant agreement. "I thought things were getting better," he said when I presented him with the papers. "I thought we were working things out." "I need time and space to heal," I told him, the half-truth bitter on my tongue. "This doesn't have to lead to divorce. But right now, I need this formality to protect myself financially while you work on your recovery." He signed the papers with tears in his eyes, believing this was just another bump in our road to reconciliation. The guilt I felt was real, but not overwhelming enough to change my course. Meanwhile, I began quietly preparing for my exit. I opened new bank accounts at a different bank. I researched states with favorable laws regarding lottery winnings and asset protection. I connected with a financial advisor recommended by Jennifer, who specialized in sudden wealth management. And I watched Mark, looking for any sign that he was slipping back into old patterns. To his credit, he seemed to be working his program diligently. He attended meetings, found a job, paying significantly less than his previous position, but it was something, and remained transparent about his whereabouts and spending. But I couldn't shake the memory of Carolyn's words about Mark's father, the cycles of recovery and relapse that had characterized his entire life. The knowledge that even if Mark stayed clean for years, the addiction would always be there, waiting for a moment of weakness, a perfect storm of stress and opportunity. Did I want to spend the rest of my life watching for signs, waiting for the other shoe to drop? Did I want to rebuild only to face the possibility of having it all torn down again? The answer was no. I'd given 12 years of my life to this marriage. I wasn't willing to give any more. 63 days after buying the ticket, with the legal separation firmly in place and my exit strategy fully developed, I finally claimed my prize. I opted for the lump sum payment, which after taxes came to approximately $2.8 million. Not the full $4.7 million, but more than enough to change my life completely. I claimed the winning anonymously, using the structures Jennifer had helped me set up. As far as the public was concerned, the winner was a trust established by a law firm. My name appeared nowhere in the public record. Mark never knew. I told him I was going to visit my sister for a few days, but instead checked into a hotel in the capital city to handle the lottery claim, then flew directly to meet with my new financial team in another state. When I returned, everything was in place. The money was secured in accounts and investments that Mark had no access to, and if Jennifer's legal strategies worked as planned, would have no claim on. Now came the hardest part, the final exit. I'd rehearsed what I would say countless times, but when the moment came, sitting across from Mark at our small kitchen table, the words still stuck in my throat. "I want a divorce," I finally said, the words hanging in the air between us. His face crumpled. "Lisa, please. We're making progress. I haven't gambled in 3 months. I'm working the steps. I'm trying so hard." "I know you are," I said and meant it. "This isn't about punishing you, Mark. It's about me needing to move on." "Is there someone else?" he asked, his voice breaking. "No," I assured him. "There's no one else. There's just no us anymore? Not for me. What about everything we've built together?" he pleaded. The irony of his question hit me like a physical blow. "You destroyed everything we built together," I reminded him, my voice hardening. "Every penny we saved. Every dream we planned. You gambled it all away without a second thought." "That's not fair," he protested. "I was sick. I'm getting better. And I'm glad for you. I truly am. But that doesn't change what happened, and it doesn't change how I feel. I took a deep breath. I'll be moving out next weekend. I've already found a place. You can't afford a place on your own, he said, confusion evident in his voice. We can barely afford this apartment with both our incomes. This was the moment I'd dreaded, the lie I would have to tell to cover the sudden improvement in my financial situation. My company is transferring me to our Boston office, I said, having prepared this story carefully. They're giving me a significant promotion and relocation assistance. It's an opportunity I can't pass up. Boston? He repeated, stunned. That's across the country. When did this happen? They approached me last month. I've been thinking it over, but I've decided to accept. I met his gaze steadily. It's best for both of us, Mark. A clean break. We can do long distance, he suggested desperately. I could look for jobs in Boston. I shook my head. No, this marriage is over. I've tried, but I can't get past what happened. Every time I look at you, I see the man who gambled away our future while lying to my face. I don't trust you, and I don't think I ever will again. The harsh truth landed like a physical blow. He recoiled, tears welling in his eyes. Please, he whispered. I love you. Love isn't enough, I said gently. Not anymore. The next week was excruciating. Mark oscillated between desperate attempts to change my mind and bitter recriminations. He accused me of giving up too easily, of using his addiction as an excuse to leave when I'd already been looking for a way out. He threatened to contest the divorce, to reveal to my company that I'd lied about the transfer. But in the end, exhausted and defeated, he signed the divorce papers my lawyer had prepared. The terms were fair, more than fair, actually. I'd agreed to take on half the debt he'd accumulated through his gambling, despite Jennifer advising that I could potentially argue for him to bear the full burden. I left him the furniture and paid the security deposit on a smaller apartment he could afford on his new salary. What I didn't do was reveal my lottery winnings. As far as Mark knew, I was simply moving to Boston for a better job, starting fresh with my half of our remaining assets, meager as they were, and my share of our considerable debt. On my last day, as I packed the final boxes into my car, he stood in the doorway of the apartment, looking lost. I really thought we were forever, he said quietly. I paused, keys in hand. So did I. Will you at least stay in touch? Let me know how you're doing. I considered lying, promising communication I had no intention of delivering. But I'd had enough of lies. No, I said honestly. I need a clean break to heal. Maybe someday, but not now. He nodded, resignation settling over his features. I'm sorry, Lisa. For everything. I hope you find happiness. I hope you stay in recovery. I replied, meaning it sincerely. Despite everything, I didn't wish him ill. I just couldn't be part of his story anymore. I drove away without looking back, the lottery ticket that had changed everything now cashed and converted into a new future, one that Mark would never know about. The irony wasn't lost on me. His gambling had destroyed our marriage, and my single venture into the world of chance had given me the means to escape it. As I merged onto the highway, heading not toward Boston but toward the new life I'd carefully constructed with my unexpected winnings, I felt a complex mix of emotions: guilt for my deception, relief at my freedom, sorrow for what might have been, and underneath it all, a steely determination to never again put my fate in someone else's unreliable hands. I hadn't just won the lottery, I'd won my life back. But the story doesn't end there. Because while I'd executed my exit plan perfectly, I hadn't accounted for one crucial factor: Mark's investigative skills when motivated by suspicion. 3 months after our divorce was finalized, as I was settling into my new home in Arizona, not Boston, another level of misdirection, I received an email that made my blood run cold. The subject line read simply, "I know about the lottery." My heart pounding, I opened it to find a brief message. Lisa, funny thing about addiction, it makes you hyper-aware of other people's patterns. I noticed you acted strange after that trip to the grocery store the night before I came home from treatment. You kept checking your purse, touching it like it held something precious. It took me months to put it together, but I finally remembered seeing a lottery ticket in your wallet that day. I checked the drawing dates and winners. Imagine my surprise when I discovered someone won $4.7 million on a ticket purchased at the exact store you shopped at, on the exact day you were there. I'm not stupid, Lisa. You didn't leave for a promotion. You left because you won the lottery and didn't want to share it with me. We need to talk. Mark. I sat staring at the screen, ice forming in my veins. This wasn't supposed to happen. I'd been so careful, so meticulous in my planning, but I'd underestimated Mark's attention to detail when it came to anything remotely connected to gambling, even a lottery ticket. I immediately called Jennifer. "He has no proof," she assured me after I explained the situation. "It's all circumstantial. Yes, you bought a ticket. Yes, someone won. But there's no way to connect you to that winning ticket unless you claimed it in your name, which you didn't." "What should I do?" I asked, still shaking. "Deny everything," she said firmly. "Or better yet, don't respond at all. He's fishing. Don't bite." I wanted to take her advice. It was the sensible thing to do. But something in me, perhaps guilt, perhaps a desire for closure, perhaps just weariness with lies, made me respond. "Mark, you're right. I did win the lottery, and I did use it as an opportunity to start over. I won't apologize for that decision. The money doesn't change anything between us. Our marriage was over the moment you chose gambling over our future, over and over again. Please don't contact me again. Lisa." His response came within minutes. "You cheated me out of millions that should have been half mine. We were still married when you bought that ticket. I'm calling a lawyer tomorrow. Prepare to see me in court." And just like that, the freedom I'd thought I'd secured was threatened. The carefully constructed new life I was building could come crashing down if a court decided Mark was entitled to half my winnings. But Jennifer hadn't steered me wrong so far. When I forwarded Mark's threats, she remained calm. "We prepared for this possibility," she reminded me. "The legal separation was in place. The ticket was purchased with your separate funds. You were living apart. We have documentation of his gambling losses and the financial devastation he caused. No judge will look favorably on his claim to money won by the spouse he financially ruined. So you think we can win if he sues?" I asked anxiously. "I think we have a very strong case," she said. "But litigation is always unpredictable, not to mention expensive and emotionally draining. Let's see if we can resolve this another way." Jennifer proposed a settlement, a one-time payment to Mark of $250,000 in exchange for a complete release of all claims related to the lottery winnings and a strict confidentiality agreement. It was a significant sum, but far less than the half he might try to claim, and it would avoid the stress and uncertainty of a court battle. I struggled with the decision. On principle, I didn't want to give Mark a penny. He'd already taken so much from me, not just financially, but emotionally. Yet the prospect of dragging this out in court, of having my life once again entangled with his, was unbearable. "Make the offer," I finally told Jennifer. "But make it clear this is it. If he doesn't accept, we'll fight him all the way." Mark's lawyer contacted Jennifer the next day. To my surprise, Mark accepted the settlement without counter-offering. Perhaps he recognized the weakness of his position, or perhaps he just wanted quick cash. The settlement was finalized within weeks. Mark received his payment, signed the confidentiality agreement, and disappeared from my life. This time, I hoped for good. With that final loose end tied up, I was truly free to begin again. The lottery winnings, even after the settlement, taxes, and legal fees, gave me options I'd never had before. I didn't have to work unless I wanted to. I could live anywhere, do anything. But freedom, I discovered, can be its own kind of burden when you've never had it before. What do you do when you can do anything? Who are you when you're no longer defined by your obligations, your struggles, your relationships? These were the questions I grappled with in the months following the settlement with Mark. I bought a modest but beautiful house in Sedona with spectacular Red Rock views. I donated to charities supporting gambling addiction awareness and financial literacy. I traveled, something Mark and I had always talked about but rarely done. And slowly, I began to rediscover the woman I'd been before. Not the naive, trusting person who'd been blindsided by betrayal, but the core of who I was, my values, my interests, my capacity for joy. I made new friends, people who knew nothing of my past or my sudden wealth. I took classes in subjects that had always interested me: photography, literature, geology. I hiked the stunning landscapes of my new home state, finding peace in the vast open spaces and ancient rock formations. One evening, sitting on my patio watching the sunset paint the red rocks in ever-deepening shades of crimson and gold, I received a text from an unknown number. "I'm 1 year sober today. The money helped me pay off debts and start fresh. I'm actually grateful now that you left. It forced me to face myself. Thank you, in a strange way, for pushing me to truly recover. Be well, Lisa." I knew it was from Mark, though he hadn't signed it. I sat with the message for a long time, watching the last light fade from the sky, feeling an unexpected sense of closure. I didn't respond to the text. There was nothing more to say between us. But I was glad to know he was sober, that perhaps some good had come from the painful end of our marriage. As night fell completely and the first stars appeared above the desert, I realized I no longer felt guilty about how I'd left. The lottery win hadn't just given me financial freedom, it had given me the means to escape a cycle that might have trapped me for decades, like it had trapped Mark's mother. Some might call what I did selfish. Perhaps it was. But after years of putting Mark's needs first, of trying to hold together a marriage he'd been actively destroying, I'd finally chosen myself. And I couldn't regret that choice. The ticket that had changed everything was long gone, cashed in and converted to the life I now lived. But I'd kept the receipt from that grocery store run, tucked away in a small box of mementos. Not as a reminder of the money, but of the moment when fate had offered me an unexpected escape hatch, and I'd had the courage to take it. In the strangest of ironies, while Mark had lost everything to gambling, my one and only gamble had saved me. $2 had purchased not just a lottery ticket, but the key to a door I hadn't even known existed, a door leading to a life rebuilt on my own terms, by my own rules. Sometimes in quiet moments like this one, I still marvel at the wild improbability of it all. How the universe had thrown me a lifeline just when I was drowning. How destruction and creation had come full circle. My husband had gambled away our savings, so I won the lottery and left him broke. And in doing so, I'd finally hit the jackpot, not just financially, but in reclaiming my life, my freedom, and my future. The morning after I received Mark's 1-year sobriety text, I woke with a strange sense of restlessness. His message had stirred something in me, not regret exactly, but a nagging awareness that while I'd physically escaped our shared past, emotionally I remained tethered to it. I'd built a beautiful life in Sedona. My house, nestled among the red rocks, was everything I'd ever dreamed of, airy, peaceful, filled with light. I had financial security, new friends, and the freedom to pursue interests I'd set aside during my marriage. By all objective measures, I should have been completely happy. Yet Mark's simple text had revealed a truth I'd been avoiding. I hadn't fully processed what had happened. I'd been so focused on executing my escape plan, on protecting my lottery winnings, on building a new life, that I hadn't properly grieved the old one. Standing on my patio that morning, coffee in hand, watching the first rays of sunlight touch the red rocks, I made a decision. It was time to face the emotional aftermath of my marriage's collapse head-on, rather than continuing to outrun it. You can't heal what you don't acknowledge. My therapist had told me during one of our sessions. I'd nodded politely but hadn't really embraced the concept. Now I was ready to try. I started small, allowing myself to revisit memories I'd been suppressing. Our wedding day, the house we'd bought together, holidays and anniversaries, the dreams we'd shared. I let myself feel the loss of those things, not just the financial loss Mark had caused, but the loss of the future I'd once believed in so completely. For the first time, I cried for that lost future. Not the bitter tears of betrayal I'd shed when I discovered his gambling, but genuine grief for the death of something that had once been precious to me. As spring turned to summer, I continued this process of emotional excavation. I joined a support group for divorced women, where I found myself among others who understood the complex mix of relief, grief, anger, and guilt that comes with ending a long marriage. "I left my husband after finding out he'd been having affairs for years," said Diane, a silver-haired woman with kind eyes during one meeting. "Sometimes I feel guilty that I'm happier now than I ever was with him. Is that wrong?" Her question resonated deeply with me. I'd been wrestling with the same feeling, an unsettling combination of guilt over my deception regarding the lottery winnings and the undeniable fact that I was thriving in my new life. "I don't think it's wrong," I found myself saying. "I think it's a sign that leaving was the right choice, however painful it might have been." The other women nodded in agreement, and in that moment, I felt a small knot of tension within me begin to loosen. I didn't share the full details of my situation with the group. The lottery win remained my closely guarded secret, but I did speak about the betrayal of discovering my husband's gambling addiction and the financial devastation it had caused. Their support and understanding became an unexpected source of strength. As I worked through my emotional baggage, I also began to think more seriously about what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. The lottery winnings had given me financial freedom, but money alone doesn't provide purpose. Before my marriage, I'd been passionate about my career in marketing. I'd loved the creativity, the challenge, the sense of accomplishment, but after the chaos of the past 2 years, I wasn't sure if returning to that field was what I wanted. "What did you love doing before adult responsibilities took over?" my therapist asked during one session. The question transported me back to college, to the art classes I'd taken as electives alongside my business courses. I'd been good at art, good enough that my professor had encouraged me to consider it as a career path. But practicality had won out, and I'd set aside those creative pursuits for the stability of a business degree. On an impulse, I signed up for a painting workshop at a local arts center. The first time I held a paintbrush again, something clicked into place. The hours flew by as I lost myself in color and texture and light. I left the class with paint-stained hands and a sense of exhilaration I hadn't felt in years. I began painting regularly, converting a sun-filled room in my house into a studio. At first, my work was purely for my own enjoyment, an outlet for emotions too complex for words. But as my skills improved and my style developed, I started sharing my pieces with friends. "You should show these in a gallery," said Elena, a woman I'd met in my hiking group, as she studied a landscape I'd painted of Cathedral Rock at sunset. "They're really good, Lisa." The idea seemed absurd at first. I was an amateur, a hobbyist, not a real artist. But Elena was persistent. She happened to know the owner of a small gallery in town and arranged an introduction. To my astonishment, Gabriella, the gallery owner, was enthusiastic about my work. "There's something authentic about your landscapes," she said, examining my paintings with a critical eye. "An emotional quality that resonates. I'd like to include a few pieces in our upcoming local artists exhibition." And just like that, at 44 years old, I stumbled into a new identity: artist. When my paintings sold, all 3 of them, at the exhibition, I felt a validation that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with having created something of value from my own vision and skill. I threw myself into painting with renewed dedication, developing a style that combined realism with emotional expressionism. My landscapes weren't just representations of the physical world, but explorations of the feelings these places evoked: peace, awe, contemplation, belonging. Art became my therapy, my meditation, my joy. I established a routine: painting in the mornings when the light was clear and my mind fresh, hiking in the afternoons for inspiration, evenings spent with friends or quietly reading in my peaceful home. For the first time in my adult life, I felt completely aligned with myself. No compromises, no suppressing parts of my personality to keep the peace, no walking on eggshells around someone else's fragility. I was building a life that reflected who I truly was, not who I needed to be for someone else. The irony wasn't lost on me. It had taken the complete collapse of my marriage and an extraordinarily lucky lottery win for me to find this authentic version of myself. But maybe that's how life works sometimes: destruction clearing the way for creation. As my art career began to blossom, my work now featured in galleries in Sedona and eventually Phoenix, I found myself thinking less and less about Mark and our past together. The settlement I'd paid him had bought not just legal closure, but, increasingly, emotional closure as well. Until the day, 18 months after his sobriety text, when Mark appeared on my doorstep. I was in my studio, working on a commissioned piece, when the doorbell rang. Wiping paint-stained hands on my apron, I made my way to the front door, expecting a package delivery. Instead, I found my ex-husband standing on my porch. My first reaction was pure shock. "Mark? What are you doing here?" He looked better than the last time I'd seen him. Healthier, his eyes clear, his posture straight. He wore a casual button-down shirt and jeans, his hair shorter than he'd worn it during our marriage. "I'm sorry to show up unannounced," he said, his voice steady. "I tried to call, but your number has changed." I'd changed it precisely to avoid unexpected communications like this. "How did you find me?" I asked, not inviting him in. "It wasn't hard," he admitted. "Your art website lists you as being based in Sedona. I asked around at a few galleries until someone pointed me to this neighborhood. Then I recognized your car." I cursed myself for not being more careful. In building my new identity as an artist, I'd inadvertently created a trail that led right to my door. "What do you want, Mark?" I asked, arms crossed defensively. 5 minutes of your time," he said. "That's all?" "I'm in town for a conference and I needed to see you." To say some things face to face? Every instinct told me to close the door, to protect the peace I'd fought so hard to achieve. But there was something in his expression, a steadiness that hadn't been there before, that made me hesitate. 5 minutes, I agreed reluctantly. We can talk on the patio. I led him around the side of the house to the back patio, not wanting him inside my home. We sat at the outdoor table, the spectacular Red Rock view spread before us, the air fragrant with blooming desert wildflowers. "This is beautiful," Mark said, looking around appreciatively. "You always did have an eye for special places." I didn't acknowledge the compliment. "Your 5 minutes started when we sat down," I reminded him. He nodded, took a deep breath, and looked me directly in the eyes. "I'm here as part of my 9th step," he said, referencing the Alcoholics Anonymous and Gamblers Anonymous step that involves making amends. I've made amends to many people over the past 2 years, family members, friends, colleagues, but you were the person I harmed the most, and making amends to you has been the step I've both dreaded and needed the most. I remained silent, wary but listening. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness," he continued. "I don't expect that and I don't deserve it. I'm here to tell you face to face that I take full responsibility for destroying our marriage through my addiction and my lies. Not just the gambling, but the years of dishonesty about my family history, my job loss, everything." His words were clearly rehearsed but seemed sincere. "I'm also here to tell you that I understand why you left the way you did," he said, surprising me. "For years I put my needs above yours. I betrayed your trust repeatedly. When you won the lottery, you finally had the means to put yourself first. I can't blame you for taking that opportunity." I studied his face, looking for signs of the manipulation he'd been so skilled at during our marriage. But I saw only calm acceptance. "Are you still gambling?" I asked. "No," he said firmly. 2 years and 3 months sober. I still attend meetings 3 times a week. I work with a sponsor and I now sponsor 2 other men. My life is built around recovery. "And the money?" I couldn't help asking. "The settlement?" A slight smile touched his lips. "I used it exactly as I told you I would. I paid off all the remaining debt, our debt, that I created. I made restitution to my former employer. I got training in addiction counseling, which is what I do now. I live simply. No gambling, no debts, no secrets. I wanted to hold on to my anger, to maintain the emotional walls I'd built, but there was something disarming about his honesty, his lack of expectations. "I'm glad to hear you're doing well," I said finally, my voice softer than I'd intended. "You too," he said, glancing at my paint-stained hands. "I saw your work online. You're talented, Lisa. Really talented. I always knew you had that creative side, even when you didn't have time to explore it." A complicated emotion welled up in me, something between gratitude for the acknowledgement and resentment that he was taking even partial credit for my artistic development. "My 5 minutes are probably up," Mark said, checking his watch. "Thank you for listening. That's all I came to say. That I'm sorry, truly sorry, and that I take full responsibility for what happened between us." He stood and I found myself rising as well. "One more thing," he said, reaching into his pocket. "This belongs to you. I should have given it back a long time ago." He held out his hand. In his palm lay my grandmother's ring, a delicate gold band with a small but perfect sapphire. I'd given it to him for safekeeping years ago when the setting had become loose, and in the chaos of our separation and divorce, I'd forgotten all about it. "I found it when I was moving last year," he explained. "I've been holding on to it until I had a chance to return it properly." I took the ring, the familiar weight of it in my palm stirring memories of my grandmother. "Thank you," I said quietly. "This means a lot to me." Mark nodded. "I should go. My flight back to Portland is this evening." "Portland?" I echoed, surprised. "You moved to Oregon?" "About a year ago. It's where my treatment center was, and I found a good recovery community there. Fresh start." As we walked back around to the front of the house, an unexpected question formed in my mind. Are you seeing anyone?" I asked, immediately regretting the personal nature of the question. Mark paused at the edge of my driveway. "I am, actually. Her name is Sarah. She's a pediatric nurse. We met at a recovery event about 8 months ago." His expression softened. "She's good for me. Keeps me accountable. Understands the addiction but doesn't enable it." "I'm glad," I said, and found that I meant it. "What about you?" he asked. I shook my head. "I've dated a bit, but nothing serious. I'm focusing on my art, on building my life here." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That makes sense." He hesitated, then added, "You deserve to be happy, Lisa." I hope you find someone worthy of your trust when you're ready. The simple kindness of this wish, from the man who had once shattered that trust so completely, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Goodbye, Mark," I said, my voice steady despite the emotion tightening my throat. "Goodbye, Lisa. Take care of yourself." I watched him walk to his rental car, get in, and drive away. Only when he'd disappeared around the bend did I realize I was clutching my grandmother's ring so tightly that it had left an imprint on my palm. That night I couldn't sleep. Mark's visit had stirred up emotions I thought I'd resolved. Not love, that was well and truly gone, but a confused mix of resentment, relief, and something that felt uncomfortably like respect for the man he seemed to have become. Was it possible to genuinely change so fundamentally? To transform from the selfish, deceptive addict who had destroyed our marriage into the steady, accountable man who had stood on my patio, asking for nothing but the chance to make amends? I wasn't sure, and that uncertainty disturbed me. I'd built my new life on the certainty that leaving Mark had been the right decision, that he would have continued his cycle of addiction and recovery indefinitely, that I'd escaped just in time. What if I'd been wrong? What if he really had changed? What if he could have changed while still married to me? No, I reminded myself firmly. Even if Mark's transformation was genuine, it didn't invalidate my decision to leave. I deserved the chance to build a life untainted by the trauma of his betrayal. I deserved the freedom I'd found here in Sedona, the joy I'd discovered in my art. And yet, as I finally drifted off to sleep in the early hours of the morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that Mark's visit had shifted something within me. Not regret for leaving, but perhaps the beginning of forgiveness. Not for his sake, but for my own. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't expected. Mark's appearance hadn't destabilized my new life. It had given me an opportunity to measure how far I'd come. 2 years ago, seeing him would have thrown me into emotional turmoil for weeks. Now, after a single night of restlessness, I was able to put the encounter in perspective. His visit was a gift, I realized, a chance to see that both of us had moved on, had built new lives from the wreckage of our shared past. Like two survivors of the same shipwreck, we'd washed up on different shores and found ways to not just survive, but thrive. With that realization came another. I was ready to fully embrace my future, without the shadow of my past with Mark hanging over it. I had been holding part of myself in reserve, afraid to be too happy, too successful, too fulfilled, as if doing so would somehow justify the way I'd left. No more. I had paid my debts. Literally, in the form of the settlement, and emotionally, in the form of the guilt and grief I'd worked through. It was time to release the last invisible tether connecting me to my old life. I threw myself into my art with renewed energy. I took risks with my work, experimenting with new techniques and themes. I submitted pieces to more prestigious galleries and competitions. I raised my prices to reflect the growing demand for my paintings. To my amazement, my career flourished beyond anything I could have imagined. A prominent Phoenix gallery offered me a solo exhibition. An art critic for a national magazine wrote a glowing review of my work, describing it as landscape painting that captures not just the physical reality of the Southwest, but its spiritual essence. Collectors began seeking me out. Interior designers incorporated my pieces into high-end homes. A luxury hotel in Scottsdale commissioned a series of large-scale works for their newly renovated lobby. I hired an assistant, Mia, to help manage the business side of my art career, scheduling, correspondence, social media. A recent art school graduate with boundless enthusiasm and impeccable organizational skills, she quickly became indispensable, freeing me to focus on creating. Money was no longer a concern, but this time it wasn't because of lottery luck. It was because I had built something valuable with my own talent and hard work. The validation of earning my own success was profoundly satisfying in a way that even the lottery win hadn't been. Of course, the financial foundation the lottery had provided had made this possible. Without that cushion, I might never have had the courage to pursue art as more than a hobby. The irony wasn't lost on me. Mark's addiction had led to financial ruin, which had led to my lottery purchase, which had funded my escape, which had given me the freedom to discover my artistic talent, which had now created a new source of financial abundance. Life's strange circles. As my professional life blossomed, my personal life began to shift as well. The emotional walls I'd built after my divorce slowly lowered. I found myself more open to new relationships, not just friendships, but the possibility of romance. I started dating again. Cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. I met interesting men through gallery events, hiking groups, and friends' introductions. Some connections lasted a few weeks, others a few months. None developed into anything serious, but each relationship taught me something about myself and what I wanted. 3 years after my divorce, and nearly a year after Mark's unexpected visit, I met James at a charity fundraiser in Phoenix. A widower in his late 40s with kind eyes and a quiet confidence, he was a pediatric surgeon who collected Southwestern art. "I've been admiring your work for some time," he told me after we were introduced by a mutual friend. "Your use of light is extraordinary, the way you capture those fleeting moments when the sun hits the red rocks just so." What began as a conversation about art technique evolved into drinks, then dinner, then a connection that surprised us both with its ease and depth. James had lost his wife to breast cancer 5 years earlier. He understood grief, the process of rebuilding, the delicate balance of honoring the past while embracing the future. "It's like learning to walk again after an injury," he said during one of our early conversations. "You don't forget the pain, but eventually, it stops being the thing that defines your movement." His insight resonated deeply with me. For the first time since my divorce, I found myself able to talk about my marriage, the good parts and the devastating end, without the conversation being dominated by anger or pain. I was careful, of course. I revealed my lottery win only after we'd been dating exclusively for 6 months, when I was certain of his character and intentions. His reaction reflected exactly why I'd grown to trust him. "That's quite a story," he said when I finished explaining everything, the discovery of Mark's gambling, the lottery win, my escape plan. There was no judgment in his voice, just thoughtful consideration. "I can see why you'd be protective of that information." "You're not bothered by what I did?" I asked hesitantly. "Taking the money and leaving the way I did?" James was quiet for a moment, considering his response carefully, one of the qualities I'd come to value most about him. "I think you did what you needed to do to protect yourself in an impossible situation," he finally said. "Was it the most ethically straightforward choice? Probably not, but life rarely presents us with ethically straightforward choices, especially when we're dealing with addiction and betrayal." His compassionate understanding brought tears to my eyes. "I've carried this secret for so long," I admitted. "It's been a burden, even though I don't regret my decision." "Secrets usually are burdens," he agreed, taking my hand. "Thank you for trusting me with yours." Our relationship deepened over the following months. James became my confidant, my companion, my lover. He respected my independence and cherished my artistic passion. I admired his dedication to his young patients and his resilience in the face of loss. We took things slowly, both of us aware of the precious nature of this second chance at love. We maintained separate homes, his in Phoenix, mine in Sedona, seeing each other on weekends and whenever his surgical schedule allowed. The arrangement suited us both, giving us time together while preserving the independent lives we'd built. On the 4th anniversary of my lottery win, a date that had become significant to me as the beginning of my new life, James proposed during a hot air balloon ride over the red rocks at sunrise. "I'm not asking you to give up anything," he said as he held out a ring with a stunning opal surrounded by small diamonds. "Not your home, not your independence, not a moment of your artistic time. I'm just asking for the chance to build a life together, in whatever form works for us." Through tears of joy, I accepted. We were married 6 months later in a small ceremony on the patio of my Sedona home, now our home, as James had sold his Phoenix house and established a part-time surgical practice in Sedona to complement his work at the Children's Hospital in Phoenix. Our life together settled into a rhythm that supported both our careers and our relationship. James worked 3 days a week in Phoenix, staying at a small apartment near the hospital, and 4 days in Sedona. I maintained my studio schedule, now with even more freedom to travel for exhibitions and inspiration. Together, we created a foundation supporting children's arts therapy programs, using a portion of my lottery winnings and the proceeds from special exhibition events. The work gave both of us profound satisfaction, James with his medical knowledge of how art therapy could help children heal, and me with my first-hand experience of art's transformative power. 5 years after my divorce, I rarely thought about Mark. The lottery ticket that had once seemed so pivotal had become just one element in a complex journey that had led me to where I was now. A successful artist, a happily married woman, a person at peace with her past and excited about her future. Until the day I received the email from Carolyn, Mark's mother. "Dear Lisa, I hope this message finds you well. I've followed your artistic career from afar and am so pleased to see how successful you've become. I'm writing to share some difficult news. Mark passed away last week from an undiagnosed heart condition, the same one that took his father. It was sudden and, the doctors assured me, painless. Before you worry about why I'm telling you this, please know that I don't expect anything from you. Not attendance at the service, not condolences, nothing. I simply thought you should know. Mark spoke of you often in these last years, always with respect and a recognition of the ways he had failed you. He was proud of your accomplishments, though he was careful to keep his distance out of respect for your new life. He remained sober until the end, continued his work as an addiction counselor, and found some measure of peace and purpose. I thought that might mean something to you. Wishing you continued happiness and success. Carolyn. I sat at my computer, stunned by the news. Mark, dead at 47. The same age his father had been when he died at that casino in Atlantic City. The same heart condition, likely genetic, undetected despite Mark's recovery and healthier lifestyle. James found me there, still staring at the screen, tears streaming down my face. "What is it?" he asked, alarmed. "What's happened?" I showed him the email, watching as he read it carefully. "I'm so sorry, Lisa," he said when he finished, putting his arm around my shoulders. "This must be a shock." "It is," I admitted. "But I'm not sure why I'm crying. We've been divorced for 5 years. I've moved on. I'm happy with you. Because grief isn't linear or logical," James said gently. "And because at one point he was the center of your world. You loved him. The fact that the marriage ended badly doesn't erase the 12 years before that. His understanding gave me permission to feel the complex emotions washing through me. Not grief for the man Mark had become at the end of our marriage, but for the young man I'd fallen in love with, for the dreams we'd shared, for the life we'd planned together that had unraveled so completely. The funeral is in Portland day after tomorrow," I said, rereading the email. "Carolyn says she doesn't expect me to attend, but do you want to go?" James asked, no judgment in his voice. "I think I do," I realized, surprising myself. Not for Mark exactly, but for closure. For a chance to say goodbye to that chapter of my life completely. "Then we'll go," James said simply. 2 days later, we stood at the back of a small chapel in Portland, listening as Mark's colleagues from the addiction treatment center where he'd worked spoke of his dedication to helping others overcome the same demons he'd battled. "Mark always said that his greatest failure led to his most meaningful work," said a gray-haired man who identified himself as Mark's sponsor. "He turned his most shameful experiences into tools to help others find their way back to integrity and purpose." I was struck by how many people attended, not just family, but men and women of all ages who spoke of how Mark had helped them in their recovery journeys. He had, it seemed, built a life of service and meaning from the wreckage of his addiction. After the service, Carolyn spotted me as she greeted mourners. Her face registered surprise, then genuine appreciation as she made her way over to where James and I stood. "Lisa," she said, taking my hands in hers, "I never expected you to come. Thank you for being here. I'm sorry for your loss," I said sincerely. He was important to me for many years. I needed to say goodbye. I introduced James, who expressed his condolences with the compassionate grace that was so characteristic of him. "He'd be pleased you found happiness," Carolyn said, looking between us with approval. "He worried about that, you know, that the damage he'd caused might keep you from trusting again." "It took time," I admitted, "but I found my way forward." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "He did too in his own way. Never remarried, but found purpose. Found peace." She hesitated, then added, "He kept a folder of articles about your art, you know. Whenever you were featured in a magazine or newspaper, he'd add it to his collection. He was genuinely proud of what you achieved." The information touched me unexpectedly. The idea that Mark had followed my career, had taken pride in my success without ever intruding on my new life, spoke to a level of respect I hadn't fully appreciated during his brief visit to Sedona. "There's something else," Carolyn said, lowering her voice. "Mark left a letter for you. He updated it every year on the anniversary of your divorce in case anything ever happened to him. Would it be all right if I mailed it to you?" I hesitated, unsure if I wanted to receive Mark's final words. "It's entirely your choice," James said quietly beside me. "No right or wrong answer here." His support gave me the clarity to make my decision. "Yes," I told Carolyn. "I'd like to have it. We left Portland that evening, flying back to Arizona in contemplative silence. I was grateful for James's steady presence, for his understanding that this experience was complex for me, and his willingness to give me space to process it. A week later, a package arrived from Carolyn. Inside was a sealed envelope with my name written in Mark's familiar handwriting, along with a small wooden box I recognized, a keepsake box I'd given him for our 5th anniversary. I took both items to my studio, the place where I felt most centered and clear. Sitting at my work table, sunlight streaming through the windows, I carefully opened the envelope first. Dear Lisa, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I've written and rewritten this letter many times over the years, never quite finding the right words. How do you apologize adequately for destroying someone's trust, dreams, and financial security? The truth is, you can't. But I can tell you what I've come to understand in the years since our marriage ended. I understand now that my gambling wasn't just a bad habit or a response to stress. It was an attempt to feel powerful and in control when I actually felt inadequate and afraid. Afraid I wouldn't live up to expectations. Afraid I'd follow my father's path. Ironically, that fear led me directly to the very outcome I was trying to avoid. I understand that I didn't just lie about money. I lied about who I was, hiding parts of myself and my history that you had every right to know before committing your life to me. That fundamental dishonesty poisoned everything. I understand that when you discovered my betrayal, you were faced with an impossible choice. Stay with someone who had proven themselves untrustworthy and potentially face a lifetime of financial and emotional insecurity, or leave and start over. When the lottery gave you the means to leave safely, you took it. I don't blame you for that decision. In your position, I would have done the same. I want you to know that the settlement money you provided did exactly what I told you it would. It allowed me to make financial amends to those I'd harmed and to build a new life focused on helping others avoid or recover from the same mistakes I made. Every day of my sobriety, every person I've helped find their way back from addiction, is in some way connected to your decision to offer that settlement rather than fight me in court. For that, I am eternally grateful. I've followed your artistic career with genuine admiration. The talent was always there. I remember how you used to sketch constantly in the early years of our marriage before my problems took center stage. I'm glad you found your way back to that passion and have received the recognition you deserve. The small box accompanying this letter contains items that rightfully belong to you, photographs and mementos I found after our divorce that I thought you might want to have. There's also information about a trust I've established in both our names to provide scholarships for children of gambling addicts. I hope you'll find this an appropriate use of what remained of the settlement funds. If not, the trustee has instructions to rename it according to your wishes. I harbor no resentment toward you, Lisa. Only gratitude for the years when we were happy, and acceptance of my responsibility for why we couldn't remain so. I hope you found joy and love in your new life. You deserve nothing less. Wishing you every happiness. Mark. Tears blurred my vision as I finished reading. The letter didn't change anything, didn't erase the pain he'd caused, didn't alter the rightness of my decision to leave, but it offered something I hadn't realized I still needed: acknowledgement. Mark had truly understood the impact of his actions. He had recognized the impossible position he'd put me in. He had accepted, without resentment, the consequences of his choices. With hands that trembled slightly, I opened the wooden box. Inside were photographs I'd thought lost forever, pictures of my parents who had died before I met Mark, childhood photos, mementos from trips we'd taken in happier times, things that had no monetary value but were precious to me nonetheless. There was also a formal letter from a trust company confirming the establishment of the Lisa and Mark Carter Scholarship Fund for children impacted by addiction, with a principal amount of $175,000, the bulk of what had remained from my settlement after Mark had paid his debts. I sat in my studio for a long time, watching the light change as the sun moved across the sky, reflecting on the strange journey that had brought me to this moment. From betrayal to escape, from starting over to finding success, from guarded solitude to love with James, and now to this unexpected closure with Mark. The lottery ticket that had changed everything, that had given me the means to escape a marriage destroyed by gambling, had set in motion a chain of events I could never have predicted. In the end, it seemed, there had been enough pieces of the broken past to build something meaningful for everyone involved. Mark had found purpose in helping others battle addiction. I had found my artistic voice and a loving partnership with James. And now, through Mark's final gesture, children affected by gambling addiction would find educational opportunities they might otherwise have missed. From destruction, creation. From betrayal, truth. From endings, new beginnings. That evening, I showed James the letter and the trust documentation. "What do you think?" I asked when he'd finished reading. "About the trust? I think it's a fitting legacy," he said thoughtfully, "taking the remains of that difficult chapter and transforming it into something that helps others. It seems right somehow." I nodded, feeling the same sense of rightness. "I'll contact the trustee tomorrow and let them know I support keeping both our names on it." "Are you okay?" James asked, his eyes searching mine with loving concern. "I am," I said, realizing as I spoke that it was completely true. "I feel at peace, like a circle has closed." James smiled, drawing me into his arms. "Circles closing, circles opening," he murmured against my hair. "That's life, isn't it?" Later that night, unable to sleep, I slipped out of bed and went to my studio. In the moonlight streaming through the windows, I began a new painting, not of the red rocks this time, but of a circular path winding from darkness into light, fragments of broken things embedded in its surface, catching and reflecting the glow. I worked until dawn, lost in the flow of creation, in the transformation of pain and memory into beauty and meaning. As the first rays of sunlight touched my canvas, I stepped back to observe what I'd created. It was unlike anything I'd painted before, more abstract, more emotionally raw, yet also more hopeful. I could see in it echoes of both my journey and Mark's, parallel paths of destruction and redemption, separate but somehow connected in the greater pattern. I titled it Full Circle, and when it was complete, donated it to the recovery center where Mark had worked. It hangs there still, a testament to the complex journey from addiction to recovery, from betrayal to forgiveness, from loss to creation. Sometimes life gives you exactly what you need, though rarely in the form you expect. For me, it came as a lottery ticket, purchased in a moment of ironic desperation. For Mark, it came as the consequences of his addiction, forcing him into the recovery that gave his life new meaning. For both of us, it came as the painful end of a relationship that had once been the center of our worlds. My husband gambled away our savings. I won the lottery and left him broke. And in the end, we both found our way to lives of purpose, meaning, and peace. Not together, but not entirely apart either, connected by the invisible threads of our shared past and transformed by the separate journeys that followed. The ultimate jackpot, it turns out, wasn't the money at all. It was the freedom to become who we were meant to be, the courage to face our truths, and the grace to find meaning in even our most painful experiences. That's a win beyond measure,